and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Facebook Live. What Australia's changes to workplace laws mean for your business. Now, today's session is proudly brought to you by Kochie's Business Builders in partnership with our mates at BrightHR. I'm David Koch and I'm coming to you live from International Towers at our Barangaroo studios here in Sydney. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land we meet upon today, are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now, today's topic is one that any small or medium business needs to be across, including me. The Australian government's Fair Work Act reforms came into effect in December last year under the Secure Jobs Better Pay Act. Now, from the ban on pay secrecy to new entitlements around flexible work, there's a raft of changes that are already defining how you and I as employers manage our staff. So this 30-minute session will give you the key takeaways about how these changes affect all of us. We hope you come away feeling ready to put your best foot forward with people management, health and safety, and of course, business growth. It's an area that I know scares us all as business owners because we just want to get on with our business. Let's meet the guru who's going to take us all through this. David Price, the Chief Executive of BrightHR Australia and New Zealand, which provides HR software and support services for more than 80,000 small and medium enterprises around the world. To mark their 10th anniversary in Australia, they've launched a free e-learning offering and global marketplace exchange to advertise your business and provide extra perks for your staff. The link's on our Facebook page. David, how are you? There is a ton of stuff that we've got to get through. You've had more than 20 years experience in professional services. You're passionate about improving how we as small business owners cope in this area. Why do we need to know about these changes? Why are they so important?
I think it's just so risky to get it wrong. A lot of business owners set up business because they've got a passion. Yep. They don't want to be a HR expert or a health and safety expert. And our own surveys show us that business owners want to focus on growth and they don't want to focus on HR or red tape.
Because every time we have to focus on HR, it's because there's a problem and it becomes a nightmare. We don't want to focus on it, but when it rears its head, it just knocks us for six, doesn't it? It's so complex for us and distracts you so much.
It's a huge distraction and you want to run your business and you don't think about HR. You don't have a HR team, you don't have lawyers on standby, and it can knock you. And it's all about having a plan, thinking ahead, but again, your focus is generally giving a great service or producing something that your business is there to do.
Yep. So this half hour, we're going to run through the key issues that you actually need to know about, because I reckon 90% of you, if you're like me, you wouldn't know these changes came into effect in December. So let's drill down into it, David. First of all, pay secrecy laws have been banned. What does this mean and how should we respond to this as employers?
It's an interesting area because for large businesses, this can be quite the norm. But for a small business, it might be important for your team to not know what each other are getting paid. Yeah. So for pay secrecy, it's actually been banned for new contracts. So if you're in a particular industry as a small to medium-sized business where it's important to you, you need to consider what you're doing with new members of staff. Existing members of staff are going to talk. Yeah. So it's about reviewing your processes, your procedures, and then even starting to think a little bit ahead in terms of advertising.
Okay, hang on. Before we leave that topic, a lot of employment agreements that you put in place with new staff is non-disclosure of what's happening in the business, non-disclosure about your pay, so you can't do that anymore.
Not for new members of staff. And again, if you change your contracts for your existing members of staff, that clause can't stay in there. That needs to come out. So it's going to cause potentially some challenges for some people.
So what's the rationale behind that change?
Transparency, people sharing with each other what they're being paid, equality, treating people fairly. But business owners make decisions all the time which are right for their business.
Right.
And there might be a rationale to pay someone a different rate to pay at that time. And historically, that's been private. It's not open for discussion. People have lost their jobs for breaching these clauses, which now, certainly for new members of staff, are unlawful.
Okay. So, because there's a skill shortage at the moment, staff shortages, you know better than anyone else. So often you may have to pay someone to attract them a bit more than you would be paying existing staff, just to get a new staff member in. So does that automatically ripple affect your existing staff? Are you under any obligation to make sure they all get paid the same?
Not an obligation, but you've got to bear it in mind that discussion isn't private anymore.
Right.
So if that employee starts and they're very excited and they tell their colleagues how much they're getting paid, there are going to be potential complaints or grievances from those team members thinking they've been underpaid for some time. Okay. And even the advert itself can't disclose a payment that's not accurate. So whatever the award is, whether it's industry or job-based, it's going to be out there in the public domain.
Okay. So you're saying even advertised salaries, you've got to be careful what you put in the ads.
Yes, and it's your choice whether you disclose those rates of pay or not. But a lot of organisations, because of the skill shortage, will actually say this is what we pay. And it's not going to be confidential anymore.
Okay. So what would your advice be when you advertise? Do you give ranges of salaries now, or just ignore it altogether? Just don't advertise?
I think starting from is a good starting point. So you give a baseline. So there's a minimum baseline.
From, right.
That'll be my general advice. But then you could have a range if you really want to excite people, or you can make a decision not to share the range. But a lot of people want to know what they're going to get paid.
Yeah.
And there's different schools of thought. You entice them in and then potentially you let them down. So our position generally is you start with a number so that people know the minimum is what they're going to get paid.
Okay. There's also stricter duty of care around sexual harassment. As an employer, you need to take active steps to minimise the risk. What does that mean?
And it's not just employees, it's workers. So the actual requirement to protect people has gone wider. So historically, this would have been dealt with as a complaint.
Right.
And now there's a lot more of a formal process. So again, when you set up in business, you're not thinking about staff sexually harassing each other or contractors. But it happens, and sometimes it can just be a surprise. So again, it comes down to policies. And a lot of small businesses just don't have policies for this. They can have a policy, but a lot of small businesses don't think of sexual harassment and the workplace and where it can go.
Well, I reckon most employers, apart from the bleeding obvious, which blind Freddie knows is sexual harassment, the definition of it at sort of the fringes, I reckon most employers would have no idea.
And if you look at the definition, it's unwanted action conduct, and it's usually more than one occasion. So if somebody's feeling harassed and there's two incidents, suddenly the employer is responsible. Right. And it's looking at what protection the individual has, what training the staff have been given, and when was the last time that training was conducted. So we have some business owners who say, oh, we had a policy. So great. And when was that given to the team member? 5 years ago. Right. Okay. When was the last time it was updated? 5 years ago. Yeah. So you think, so in 5 years no one's discussed it again? Well, no. So that policy really isn't a live policy. It's a piece of paper that's 5 years old. Yep. And that's what Fair Work will be looking at. Say, well, okay, what policies and procedures do you have? When were they last updated? And are you training your staff to keep them up to date? Expectations.
See, I reckon for most business owners, that is your default. Saying, I've got a written policy. It's on the website, employee access website. I've told them to go and read it. That's it. If they didn't read it and it hasn't been updated, not my fault. I've covered myself. Under these rules, what you're telling us is you're not covered. You've actually got to take out an active interest to make sure it's updated and remind your staff that they've got to abide by it on a regular basis.
The obligation's on the employer. And ultimately, this could lead to a claim of constructive dismissal. Employee walks out, resigns, and say, I was forced to be dismissed because you didn't protect me from this unwanted conduct.
Right, okay. So, office romances and things like that office romances have been going on since the Romans. Many of them turn into beautiful love stories. Others can end acrimoniously with lots of allegations. How do you handle that under these changes?
Policies and procedures, and for big businesses, they've got it covered. Usually they've got a HR department or a legal team that has a policy on office romances.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit more detailed that in terms of if you've got a relationship and you think your employer needs to be informed, you need to let us know.
Yeah.
And in certain industries, that's the norm, but for a small business, it's not the norm. You're not
because we don't have you looking after our HR.
But you're not thinking about somebody having a relationship. You're thinking about servicing your customers, so your client base.
Yeah.
So it's having a policy. Is that policy enforced? Is it updated? Is it read and understood? Because a policy is one thing, but if someone doesn't understand it, it's not going to be enforced.
Okay. So where do you start with the policies?
For us, it's about foundations. So what do you expect from your team members and what should they expect from you?
Right.
And it comes down to...
And you include them at the start, informing the policy?
At the very beginning.
That's an important thing.
And it's having it signed and understood and having it updated and reinforced. Because again, businesses grow quickly. Suddenly it's 5 years or 10 years, a decade's passed. Those handbooks haven't been updated or those policies haven't been updated. And nobody can remember them. So no one knows their expectations when these relationships break down or things happen.
Right. So if there is a relationship within your small business, do you have to make it clear, hey, you've got to declare it to me as the employer, and then sit with both of them and say, look, and you can't tell people, don't stop liking each other or get in the way, but is that part of what Fair Work will look at, that you sitting down with them and saying, hey, these things happen, but this is what you have to keep me informed, this is what's acceptable and not?
What steps you've taken as an employer to protect your workforce and how regular those steps are taken and reinforced. So one step is a policy, a conversation's a policy. But if you look at our workplace,
conversation's a policy.
Well, a policy is part of it, and
Right.
a conversation's part of the process.
Right.
But it's more of a picture painting exercise.
Yeah.
You could have 3 conversations and no policy.
Right.
If that policy is written down, that's obviously a lot clearer, but a conversation's not. But really for us, it's having a policy, having training, regular training. What is sexual harassment? Everyone has a slightly different view maybe. So it's letting the team members know what the company expects, how to treat each other, and it's all about the recipients, how they perceive it. It's not the intended of the individual. I was just having a joke, I just thought this was office banter, it's sometimes described, but it's how the individual perceives it, how they feel. And that's really, really difficult sometimes to understand.
Particularly in a, how could I put it, a mixed workforce of demographics, age profile, gender profiles, the whole thing. So what's acceptable, and culture profiles, you can throw in, because we're such a multicultural country, you've got to cover off all of those, don't you? And have what's acceptable. One person may think, oh, I'm just having a joke, or I don't take it so seriously. You've got to be really clear from the very start.
And it can change. So someone can be fine with something, and then a couple of months later, circumstances change, and then they're not fine. And where do you draw that line?
Yeah.
And for us, there's a real simple approach. If you're unsure how something can be received, don't say it.
Okay.
And it's just a nice, simple approach, because you can never be sure.
So as an employer, should you be saying to your staff, if there's an issue, if your view changes on somebody, come and talk to me immediately, and sort of underlining immediately. If you have a problem with a staff member, come and talk to me.
Yes, and an informal approach is always the best approach.
Right.
So you speak to your line manager, your business owner, I've got a challenge, I've got a problem. and that's an informal process. Then the steps and procedures if it gets more formal.
Right.
Because the individual may not be happy with the business owner's view. The business owner's view may say, look, I think this is okay. But again, that's an informal, a verbal conversation. It's not in writing. So a formal approach, a policy around complaints is a lot stronger. And again, it's an audit trail.
Right. And with interviewing staff members, always have someone else?
It's always good practice. It's not a requirement, but again, it's more independence effectively. And business owners aren't really positioned to be interviewing or investigating. They want to get on with the business. It's red tape in a way.
Yeah.
So it's about having a process, having a policy, following that policy. And that policy generally is a complaint or a grievance policy about other members of staff.
So would your advice be to a small business owner, you could probably delegate some of the process, but never surrender that responsibility because it all comes back on you?
Ultimately, it comes back to the business owner, so absolutely. And it's about what foundations you've built your business on. So policies and procedures, then the norm for big business, and for small businesses, they can give them a real good foundation. Because it's not down to personal management decisions, it's a policy. And it's very, very objective if you've got a written policy and it's kept up to date.
As I said, I'm fascinated with it. As a business owner, this is terrific information. Another change that's coming in June, let's move on to more changes. Giving certain employees the power to request flexible working arrangements. So it comes from the employee. That includes parents, carers, pregnancies, those experiencing family or domestic violence, employees over 55. What do we need to know there? It sounds really broad.
There's a big obligation on employers to consult with the workforce for this individual who makes a request, and it's a proper request. So in terms of timeline, there's 21 days. So not only have they got to follow a process, they've got a 21-day time limit. If that time limit is exhausted, the individual can now make a claim to the Fair Work Commission.
Okay, so an individual can come to you with a request for flexibility. They must have an answer from you within 21 days.
Yes. And you've got to be shown to consider that obligation to the request.
Right.
Can your business accommodate it? And there are reasons to decline it, but you've got to be able to justify those reasons. And again, what audit trail do you have of that? Is it a conversation? Is it a meeting? What process have you followed?
Right. Gee, this audit trail, you keep repeating, mate. I think for me it's starting to sink in. You've got to dot your I's and cross your T's on this. So do the changes outline areas that you can reject these approaches that are acceptable?
Yeah, there's reasonable business grounds. Right. So again, it may not meet the needs of your customers. It might not meet the needs of your business. Because you've got this relationship of you've got your customer base, you've got your team members, and you've got your business. And it's trying to balance them all together. It might meet the individual needs of the employee, but your clients don't come in that time. Your customers aren't coming in at 6 a.m. in the morning, but it does meet the needs of the employee. So if you've got reasonable business grounds, you can decline it, but you are potentially going to see a claim, or at worst, a court case for constructive dismissal, where an employee walks out and claims they couldn't work for the employer anymore because their obligations weren't met.
Okay, so an employee can leave because they claim you're not providing the flexibility, rather than the employee go, oh well, job doesn't suit me, I'll go and look elsewhere.
And they've got to prove that they've made the decision to leave, and that's why it's called constructive dismissal, not just general dismissal. Right. Because the employer hasn't dismissed them, but the employee's claim you constructively put the situation together by refusing my request. So I'm going to resign, and I'm going to see you in court. Okay. And that's potentially where it goes wrong.
Blimey. What about if you say, okay, let's give it a go. If it works out, great, but hey, if it doesn't work out for the business, or the productivity's not there, or it's affecting our customers or whatever, does that cover you?
It's good to have a trial. So it shows that you've consulted.
Made the effort.
Yeah, you've gone the extra step further.
Right.
But again, if you're then declining that permanent amendment, the obligation's on you to show that it's fair and reasonable. And the Fair Work Commission didn't have authority historically before these amendments. So the employee had to go through a different legal route to make a claim. The Fair Work Commission has made it now a lot simpler for the employee to access that department.
Okay, all right. Now, I know if like me, I'm hogging the time with all the questions today, but because of the format of the day, and also questions in this area can be really sensitive and really individual to particular businesses. We're not taking your questions, but contact BrightHR and they will follow through all the details here on your page. So just go direct to BrightHR, because they can then give you advice that is tailored strictly to your business. And as we're understanding, there's lots of nuances in these changes, and they really have to be tailored to your own particular circumstances. So let's keep going and downloading all of the changes and give you a briefing on it. So David, one of the big takeaways so far is that you've got to get your processes right. How do you address these kinds of people management issues for business? Do you have the templates? Do you have guides that we can take the first step?
Absolutely, we've got over 80 templates, and those templates are backed up with an advice line. And the advice line is important because there are nuances, like you say. So there's a 24/7 advice line, and we've got over 2,000 questions now that have been asked to us that we've put into a bank, because some people just want a straight answer, a short answer, but from a trusted resource. So for us, it's important that you've got that trusted resource.
So you've got a resource centre that we can, equivalent of Google, the BrightHR Resource Centre with an issue, and then if you need to take it further, you've got the advice line that you can call.
Yes, and with these templates for these processes and procedures, so you've got that legal foundation, that legal basics.
Okay, all right. Some more ground to cover. Changes to fixed term contracts. What do we need to know about that?
Key takeaway, can't go past 2 years. So a lot of organisations would have a 2-year fixed term contract, maybe roll it over, but really what you're looking there at is a more permanent relationship. So the legislation's basically stopped those fixed term contracts. So it's about reviewing people who are getting close to 2 years and who've gone past 2 years, who may be deemed as more permanent members of staff now.
Okay, so you're almost obligated, are you, that at the end of the first 2-year contract, you have to show why another 2 years or 1 year or whatever, you're going for that rather than putting them on full-time staff?
Well, there's exceptions, public sector, there's certain organisations that can keep on going, but generally speaking, you can't go past 2 years.
How does the public sector get off scot-free?
Yeah, there's always exceptions, and in this legislation, public sector has government's a little bit different.
Well, so the government puts this in place for all of us, but says, oh no, we're...
And it's these nuances that people sometimes have to pick up on.
Oh, okay. I'll put that to a few politicians in the future. Now, enterprise agreements. What's changed there?
Complicated area. Unions, employees, employee bargaining. The legislation's attempting to simplify it, and they're focusing on what they call zombie agreements, which is a great title. And these are really, really old agreements that the legislation is saying these must come to an end. So if you've got a really historic old agreement, these are going to by default come to an end. And the legislation is trying to get employers and employees and unions to talk more, but it's a very complicated area of law. So it doesn't affect every small business and medium-sized business, but some enterprise agreements do exist. So these are historic, so there's no time stamp on there. So it's looking at your agreements. If they look really old, it's worth getting them reviewed.
Okay, so those zombie agreements under these changes, they're deemed to have finished.
Yes.
Basically now.
Yes.
Okay, so, and without an agreement, your relationships with staff could go haywire.
And there's a 6-month grace period, so up till June, but after June, yes.
So between now and June, you've got to get your act together.
Definitely.
So is the bargaining for the enterprise agreements, are the ground rules changed in that regard?
No, they're still the same, but it's looking at these really historic agreements that people have relied upon that probably are out of date, and saying, look, you need to basically, the legislation's forcing you back to the table in a way. to have a conversation.
So of your clients that have been caught in that, sort of you have the real life experience, how is it different to negotiate an enterprise agreement now than say it was 10 years ago? Have obligations changed? Are there nuances you've got to be have regard to?
Yes, there's ratios around how much of the workforce are consulted with to make you go into the enterprise agreements in the beginning. Oh. There's a lot to it. And we get it wrong. People in small businesses, again, enterprise agreements not something you envisage. It's not just small businesses, large businesses sometimes get these agreements wrong, and it's subject to debate.
Okay. It's a hell of a lot of changes to come in December, isn't it, that we've got to be across. And is there a grace period on all of them to the end of June? Or no, just on the enterprise agreement?
Some of these, the majority of these changes came in December the 7th. So,
right.
So they're already in.
Yeah.
And the grace period only extends to the enterprise agreements.
Okay. So of your clients, again, I'm fascinated with the real life reaction of business owners. Is there a common theme amongst the ones that are handling it better than others?
I think people who have a plan, people who contact us or they contract a trusted source, they're ahead of it, they're dealing with it. Some business owners are busy trying just to get staff. They're just, the talent drain is such a big issue.
We're going into an economic downturn. We're coping with higher inflation. There's a lot around at the moment.
Wage requests. So not every client can put their cost of service up, and people say, I need more money.
Right.
And cost of living's gone up. So they're dealing with that. Then they're dealing with these changes. There's a lot going on, and we have a lot of business owners, just people management takes time, just disputes, complaints, pay requests, and then having to review terms and conditions is a separate piece of work on its own.
Yeah. What's a best practice in terms of reviewing staff and chatting to them about it? Do you chat about these changes in annual reviews or 6 monthly reviews?
I think at the beginning of any relationship, you can have a conversation. And that's the easiest way of doing it, but not every relationship is starting afresh. So generally annual is best practice, and it depends on the size of your organisation. Some people have a daily review. The boss is in the office every day, he has a chat with people, and we call that 360-degree feedback. So basically every day you're getting feedback. But again, is that documented? And we see a lot of the time people forget, a business owner forget what was said. The employee doesn't forget maybe, because it's their focus, where the business owner's focus is providing a great service. So best practice, annual reviews, again in writing. If it's not in writing, it never happened, potentially is one viewpoint. But keeping your staff updated and just tailoring it for your business. Some businesses, it is by osmosis, they're just people talking. But if you've got remote workers, if you've got interstate workers, it becomes a lot more complicated.
Oh yeah, because you've got to keep them involved. It can't be, no excuse to be out of sight, out of mind anymore, is there? No. And use technology, use your messaging services that you use amongst employees with your staff, just to encourage that feedback all the time.
Definitely.
David, you've been a revelation. I must admit I had no idea that these changes were as broad. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to BrightHR for making this session possible. Head to brighthr.com to see how they can help your business in this regard. As David was saying, there are templates there, there's resource centres, there are hotlines for specific ones, and there are some special offers available for all of you who have tuned into this Facebook Live today. To each of you watching on Kochie's Business Builders Facebook, thank you for joining us. Feel free to share this video with anyone you know, any of your networks who might benefit from the conversation we've just had. And of course, for all the latest small business news, resources and stories, head to kochiesbusinessbuilders.com.au, watch us on TV, sign up to your newsletter, and we look forward to catching up soon. Have a great rest of your day.